Hey, my name is Jonathan Helm, and in this video, I'm going to teach you how to read a CSV or comma-separated values file into R. If you have a CSV file that you'd like to read into R, then I suggest that you use that. You can just bring it to the desktop and have it ready to go. If not, I have a few example data sets on my website, and I'll show you how to get those right now. So to get those files, you can just open up your web browser and go to my website, which is johnhelm.org. On the main web page, you'll see a button that says Stats with John, and this is where I'll keep all of my companion datasets. So go ahead and click Stats with John. There's a series of links that'll be here. There might be more or less depending on when you're watching this video. Just click the name of the playlist that corresponds to this video. So in this case, the playlist is called Reading Data into R. So just go ahead and give that a click, and you'll see that there should be a zip file that downloads that is called Reading Data into R. You can just put that on the desktop. This is going to contain all the files for all the videos, so there's more than just the CSV files. But if you open this guy up, you'll have this folder that looks like there's CSV files, space cylinder files, and some SPSS data sets that you can use to practice reading things into R. I'm just going to pull out the CSV data sets, because those are the only ones that we'll need for this video. But feel free to play around with the other ones in case you want to read some other types of data sets into R. Okay, so I have my CSV data set. Now the goal, and usually the most challenging part about using R, is just getting the data into R. I'm a firm believer that if you're able to read the data into R, the rest, whether it's regression, ANOVA, multi-level model, structured equation model, the rest is pretty easy. But just getting that data set into R is usually the most challenging part. So before we actually take the steps to reading the data set in, I just want to open up one of the files. So I have 3 files here, and I want to start with the bottom one, the salary data.csv. So we'll read this file in first. And if I open it up, we can see that there's a series of variables. There's an ID number, salary, number of publications, and so on. And then there's information for all of these variables across a series of individuals. And really what these are is just information on faculty members, right? So each row is a faculty member or professor, and then I have their salary, their average number of publications per year, the number of years that they've been a full-time faculty member, average number of grants, gender, 2 indicators for gender, and then what department they're in. And what we want to be able to do is we just want to get these variables into R so that way we can perform some statistical analysis on them. One thing to note kind of off the bat is that if there's missingness in the data, it'll just be blank, right? And I'll talk about kind of when reading in a different file in just a little while later in this video, what you can do if you have actually like a missing value, like a -99. But in this situation, we just have a blank. The other thing that's a little important to look at is that we actually also have names for the variables on top here, right? So this first row refers to each of the variable names, right? This is ID, this is salary, this is number of pubs, and so on, right? It's not actual data, okay? So again, the second row is when the observations start. These are the actual variables that we want to manipulate, and we need to remember that when we're reading the data into R. Okay, so with that in mind, now that we've looked at the data set, we can go ahead and take the steps to read this data set into R. And remember that it's a CSV file, right? So if you're using a different type of file, like an SPSS file or an Excel file, you need to follow a different series of steps, right? So this is just for a comma-separated values file. I do want to say, though, that if you're using a different file, like Excel or an SPSS data set, oftentimes you can export those data sets to be in a CSV format. So if you're in Excel or if you're in SPSS, you can save the file as a comma-separated values file, and then you can follow these steps to read the data into R. So just keep that in mind. So I'm just going to go ahead and open R. So I'm going to scroll to my Finder, scroll to my Applications folder, and I'll double click the R icon to open up R. So the console will pop up, and I'm going to open up a new editor in R. And I'm going to use this editor to read that comma-separated values file in. Okay, so actually, and just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to take this file. No, I'll leave it in the folder. I was going to move it to the desktop, but I'm going to leave this in the folder. Okay, so I'm going to add some comments reading a CSV file into R. So the way that we read a comma-separated values file into R is by using the read.csv function. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll place an argument inside this function that lets R know where the CSV file is. Okay, so the read.csv function will read the CSV file in for us. We just have to tell R where that file is. What we'll do is we'll have a set of quotes, okay, so they can either be single quotes or double quotes. And what we'll put inside these quotes is the location of that file. Okay, so on all computers, we call the location of the file the path to the file. So if I double-click my folder, I'm going to open up the location that includes the data set that I want to read in. In particular, I want to read in the salary-data.csv file. But I need to be able to come up with a path to that file. So what I'll do is I'll right-click this file, and I'll click Get Info. Now, if you're using a PC, that's okay. You can still right-click the file, but you'll choose Properties. Okay, on a Mac, it's Get Info, and on a PC, it's Properties. Now, on this Mac, I have this little string of characters that says Where, and you can actually copy and paste that. So if I copy it, I'm going to highlight it, hit Command Copy, and Command C, Command V for paste, and what I'll do is I'll end up pasting what's called the path, right? This is my path. Okay, so I have this users, right? So this is like a users folder on my computer, and inside that users folder, there's one called jhelm, and inside jhelm, there's one called desktop, which, as you can imagine, contains everything that's on my desktop. And then there's this CSV datasets folder, and this is actually the folder that we see here on the desktop. Okay. If you're using a PC, there will be something similar to this. It won't have these little arrows, but it will have backslashes. So it'll be something like C:\\, and then your name, and then maybe the desktop, and then the CSV datasets folder. Okay. Now, this is actually really important. So if you were reading this in using a PC, okay, so if you copy and paste that path, you'll note that that path on a PC will actually have backslashes, right? So it'll look something like this. Okay, it'll have these backslashes. Now, R doesn't like to use backslashes when we're reading in data sets. It only wants to use forward slashes. Okay, so make sure that you change that. If you're using a PC, make sure that the path that you are using only has forward slashes in between the different folder names. Okay, so make sure that all of these are forward slashes. So if you're using a PC, just take the time to quickly delete those backslashes and change them to forward slashes. If you're using a Mac, it's okay. Once you copy and paste the path in, it will already be a forward slashes. Okay, so at the end of this path, I need to add another forward slash because it's not good enough to just say where the file is. I also need to tell R which file we want to read in. Okay, so the path so far just directs R towards this folder, but as you can see, there are 3 files in this folder, so R needs to know which file we want to read in. I want to read in the salary-data.csv file, so I'm going to copy the name of that file, and I'm going to add this to the end. And note that the .csv is also a part of this. Okay, it has to be the complete file name. Sometimes when we're using PCs or Macs, this .csv part will be hidden, okay, and we have to make sure that we include it. So I have everything I need, right? So I have my function. There's one last piece that I want to add, and at the very front I'm going to write data is equal to. Now you can actually write anything on the left side of this equal sign. This is an object that we're about to create in R. So I'm going to create an object called data, and what will happen is R will use the read.csv function to read in the salary.csv dataset, and then it'll store that dataset in the object called data. Okay. So the read.csv function just reads the data set, and by including this equals data part out the front, R knows, okay, I'm going to read in the data, and then I'm going to store it into the object called data. Okay, so if I highlight and run this, you can see that it's not going to give me back any sort of messages, right? It's just going to run, right? Fortunately, we didn't get any errors, which indicates that we might have done what we had hoped for. And now all we need to do is just double check this new object called data. Okay, so now data is an object inside R, and I want to take a look at it. One of the easiest ways to do this is to use the head function. So use the head function to look at the top of the data set. So I use head, and then inside the head function, I'll write the name of the object, data. Okay. Now, for example, if you wrote something different here, if you wrote my data, or you wrote salary data, or example data, or something else, make sure that this part, the name of the object that you chose, exactly matches the name of the object that you're choosing for here, for head. Okay. So if I highlight and run that, it's going to print back the first 6 rows of my data. Okay, so if you have a lot of columns and there are going to be many columns that will be printed, I just have the columns that we see here so everything kind of fits nicely. And what we want to do is we want to take a look at the other Excel data file, or the original, the raw data file, and we want to make sure that the values that we see in that raw data file that's outside of R, right, this file, we want to make sure that the values of this file directly correspond to the values that we see in R. Right? There's too many times when people, or especially myself, will read a data set in incorrectly, or perform some analyses, and it's not until much later that we realize we've made an error. So it's crucial that at the beginning you double check the raw data set versus what you see in R. Okay? So I look at the first variable, it's ID, it goes from 1 to 6. I see ID is also going from 1 to 6. I take a look at salary, 81.577, 84.279, 68.599. Okay, number of pubs, 4.008, 2.412, 2.8, 4.75. Years on the job, 4.8, 123, 5.4175, 2.04, 3.08, okay, and so on. So by performing kind of this exercise, I'm just looking to make sure that the variables that R has read in are directly corresponding to the ones that I see here in my Excel file. And as far as I can tell, they do look identical, so I feel fairly certain that I read in the data correctly. Now, one important piece is that you can see that this one here, which is under the EF column, is blank. And I'm just kind of wait for the clock. I don't know if that's super loud on the video. Okay. So in this column, right, the 4th individual under grants has a blank, which means we have missing data for that individual on that variable. And if we scroll back over to our data set, we also see that, yes, the 4th individual, okay, under grants has this NA, and NA stands for not available. So in R, whenever you have a data set read into R, NA is supposed to indicate that there's missingness, right? We actually don't have a value for this variable and this particular individual. Okay, so this is also really good that we've correctly read in kind of the missing values that we would expect to see. Okay, so with that in mind, just double check and use the read CS function to read in the data set. I think we should be good to go. And I would continue on to analyze this data. Now, there's a couple of caveats that I want to point out, and I'll use the 2 other data files that we have in our CSV datasets folder to kind of highlight these caveats. The first one is this one up top, right, where it's the same salary data set. It just has neg 999 at the end of the file name. And this one is designed to show you what can happen if you actually have values for the missingness indicator, right? So if we go back to that one individual, in this situation, the 4th individual has a value of negative 999 for grants. And what this is supposed to represent is that the value negative 999 is not a real variable. It's actually the indicator for missingness. And so if I were to read this data set into R, I need to be able to tell R that any value of negative 999 is actually a missing value. Okay, so I don't want to analyze the data and treat negative 999 as a numeric value. I actually want to treat that as if it was missing. And we have a little bit of a different code for this. Okay, so I'm going to scroll in here. I'm going to say reading a CSV file with a missingness indicator. So what I'll do is I'll still use the read.csv function. I'm just going to go through the steps again just for practice. So I use the read.csv function. I go to the file that I want to read into R. I'm going to right-click that file. I'm going to say get info. I'm going to copy the path. Okay, I'm copying the path. I'm going to paste this into R, make sure that it's inside some quotes. I'm going to add a / at the end, and then I'm going to copy and paste the name of the dataset at the very end, right? So I still have the same read.csv function. I still have the same path. The only thing that differs is the name, right? The name of the file is different because we're telling R that we want to read in the salary data set that has negative 999s for missingness, right, instead of the original raw salary data set. And then what I'm going to do after that, this is the difference, I'm going to add a comma at the end. Okay, I'm going to hit return. And what this allows me to do is enter some new arguments into that function. And I have this option NA, and I'm just going to say it's equal to, and in quotes, negative 999. Right, because negative 999, that was my missingness indicator. And so I just add a little, I'll call this data2 is equal to read.csv negative 999. Okay, and then I'm going to highlight and run this. And then I'm going to take a look at the first 6 rows again, right? This time it's for data2, not data. Right? And it looks like everything is writing correctly, and you can see that I have the NA there as I would expect to see, right? And the difference is that if I don't include this little extra piece of code, then R is going to read in this data file, and we would see a negative 999 there. Okay, so that would imply that this individual apparently owes a lot of money to the government. Ha ha ha, negative 999 grant funding, right? No, really, it would mean that if I started to calculate things like means and standard deviations for this grant variable, it would use negative 999 as a numeric value. But now we've told R that negative 999 is actually a missingness indicator, and so R will go ahead and change that value to NA, and now we can perform analyses as we would like to while accounting for that missingness. Okay, so this is extremely important. Whenever you're reading in a file, make sure that you know what the missing value indicator is. Okay, one last piece, and we'll finish up this video. I know it's getting kind of long. The last one is this salary data set. Let me close out this one. The salary data set with no variable names. So when I'm opening up this one, you'll see that the first row actually doesn't have variable names, right? So the data are starting immediately, and sometimes you get a data set and this happens. I think the classic one is like anything that we use M+ with also doesn't have variable names at the top. So sometimes you run into these data sets that don't have variable names in them. And so what do we do when we run into that? Well, the steps are very similar. The only thing is that we have to add one different option. Let me take a look at this. Just want to remember, yeah, and we still have blanks, right? So we still have blanks for the missing values, so we don't need this this option here. So I'm going to read in a CSV file without variable names. So I'll just go through the whole process again, step by step. So I do read.csv, remember it's a CSV file. I need to put the path in quotes. So I go to that file, I'm going to right click and hit get info. Remember, if you're using a PC, you just right click and hit properties. You should see the path either way in the dialog box that opens up. You go back to R and you can paste the path into R. Remember, if you're using a PC, to change the backslashes to forward slashes. So now I have these forward slashes in there. And I'm going to copy and paste the exact name of the data set. So I have the exact name. Note that there isn't a .csv here. I think this was an error on my end. But I don't need it in this case because it's actually not part of the file name. And this is the difference, right? So remember that there are no variable names in this particular data set. So I have this option header, and I say is equal to false. Okay, so header is just asking the question of, is that first row a set of variable names? And if you wrote header is equal to true, then you're saying, yeah, it is, and you need to treat those as the variable names. But if you're saying header is equal to false, then you're saying, oh, R, no, that first row, those aren't variable names, those are actual data. So I want you to keep them, and I want you to store them. Okay. Now, by default, the header is set equal to true for the read.csv function. So that's why you don't need to include it up here or in the original one that we used. Right? Because by default, it'll assume that header is equal to true, and so you don't need to change anything or add any part of the code. But in this situation, we need to add the header is equal to false because we actually don't have variable names. Okay, so I'm just going to type data3 out here, and then I'll highlight and run this. Oops, no error. Maybe I hit it. Yeah, so I guess I do need that CSV. So don't believe what I say. I always add the CSV name here. try this one more time. Yeah. Okay, and then I just want to take a look at the data set again. Right, and you'll see that what will happen is R is just going to insert the v1, v2, v3, v4, and so on as kind of generic variable names, right? These are just generic forms. If I take a look at that Excel file, I can still look and see that, yeah, it's just gone onto the first row and says, yes, this first row here are not variable names, this is the first row of data, right? And I see I have values for it that directly correspond to the ones that I see in the Excel file, okay? Now, of course, what you might want to do is you might want to add some variable names, and I strongly encourage this. So what you can do is you can use the names function. So I have names of data 3 is equal to, I think the first one is ID, the second one, let's see, what should the second one be? Let's open up the other data file just to take a peek at it. It's salary, so I have salary, number of pubs, what's the next one? Salary, number of pubs, years on the job, grants, gender, female, and department. Gender, female, and department. Okay, so notice what I'm doing here is, just minimize this. Notice what I'm doing here is I'm saying I'm using a new function called names of data, and I'm saying that's equal to, and then I have the lowercase letter c, and then an open paren, and then inside I list the names of the variables inside quotes. So I have ID in quotes, comma, salary in single quotes, comma, number of pubs in quotes, comma, and then I just go through and I create labels, right? And of course, you can write anything that you want inside these quotes, right? You can call it variable 2, you can call it salary with a capital S, and so on. You can write anything that you want. So the point is that if you're reading in the data set without variable names, you can go ahead and just create them. Okay, so that's what we'll do. So I'm gonna highlight and run this code. Okay, and I'm not gonna get any errors and messages back. And now what I can do is I can take a look at the head of the data another time, right? And now I see that I have the names of those variables, right? So this was the original form that we had, and I said, you know, I really want to create some variable names for this. So I used the names function and said it's equal to this vector, the ID, salary, number of pubs, and so on. And what it's going to do is it's going to copy those names and place them at the top of the data set. Okay, and so now I can call on those variables. Okay, so thanks for listening. I hope this was super helpful. Let me please, like the video if you enjoyed it. Please leave comments if there was anything that was hard to understand or anything that could be made more clear. Feel free to email me at jonathanleehelm@gmail.com. I definitely love to hear your feedback. And feel free to also follow me on Twitter. And of course, if you can, feel free to subscribe to these videos. It helps me out. And thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.